You're listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Here we have the opportunity to listen to the stories that connect our musical family tree. First-hand accounts of performances, musicians, and mentors that shape the way we listen, learn, and teach. On today's episode, we are talking with cellist, composer, and curator Joshua Roman. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Josh has been in Bellingham performing a recital for the Bellingham Festival of Music, and I was talking to some other musicians in town. You've been here several times.
Yes, many times. Bellingham is one of those places that feels like another home that I don't know that well, but I am always super happy to come back to, and it feels like, I have people who are like family here, and I always stay with Marty Caputi.
It's great.
It's another home.
Great. Yeah, and
it.
You've gotten to play with both the festival, and I was hearing a story yesterday about you played with the Whatcom Symphony.
I did, yes, and I've performed with the Marrowstone Orchestra as well up here.
That's fantastic.
Yes.
And I think they were saying the concert that you played, the Elgar, then you went into the cello section and played Brahms one with them afterwards.
That's right. Yes, I did. Yeah,
that made a lot of people very happy. That's a lingering story.
Oh, fun.
Joshua Roman stayed and played. So much fun. Well, today, Joshua gave an amazing class kind of really on the history of cello and started out at the beginning with Bach cello suites and went right through and played some amazing works. Are those kind of the basics of what you always bring for unaccompanied recitals and concerts like that, or is that really a teaching class?
So I go through phases with programs, and when you're talking about the solo cello, it's hard to remember a time when I didn't have Bach in the mix. There are certainly times when it's just Bach, and I occasionally will do programs that don't have any of it or just have one movement. But for the most part, a solo cello program that I put on, regardless of the context, will have some Bach and then some 20th century music, because there just isn't anything in between.
Right.
And so today's class was based around a sort of compact program that I've come up with that I've been doing this season. And I didn't mean to come up with something for this season, but I was trying a couple of new things that I'd been wanting to do for a while. And once I found a way for it to work, not only for audiences that are familiar with the cello, but, have an introductory piece, have something that sort of bridges to a fun bridge that takes you to a totally avant-garde place,
right,
and then just a complete left turn at the end. I really am enjoying this one, so I think I'm going to keep honing it and maybe find some substitutions, but I really like this sort of showing everything the cello can do.
Absolutely, and it was really fun to watch the students who needed some warming up at the beginning.
Yeah.
They were pretty quiet, but as the music got crazier and crazier and the techniques got wilder, it was really fun to watch how engaged they got.
Right. So, and the main piece that sort of shakes people up, for the people listening, I guess we should tell them what the program was. So today I started with the first suite by Johann Sebastian Bach, and I didn't do a lot of it. I just played the prelude and a couple of other movements. The prelude is perhaps the most recognized solo cello piece in existence. So, and it's one of my absolute favorites to play. I play it for myself pretty often. I play Bach every day, and that for me is such a great way to say, hello, here we are, here's the cello. And then I do some other things. Today I played Appalachia Waltz by Mark O'Connor, the cello alone version, and then, which is great example of American music, kind of folk-based. Then I play a piece by Mark Summer called Julie O, which is very improvisational, has a lot of pop, bluegrass, or Celtic. You should ask Mark. Slap bass technique. Like, it's just got so much stuff. It's so fun. It's so upbeat. It's a piece that I use most often as an encore. But in this context, it serves as a bridge because it sort of surprises people, like, oh, you can hit the cello, and oh, it's like all these beats and super groovy. I keep saying groovy like we're in the 70s.
I know, but there is such a heavy groove in it.
Yeah, it's a heavy groove. And then from there, really wake people up by playing Penderecki's Capriccio per Siegfried Palm, which just uses almost every part of the cello, is totally insane, just as fun to watch as it is to listen to.
Yeah.
And something that in the wrong context, a lot of people would hear it and say, well, that's not music, or like, oh, the modern music. Ugh. But I really believe that if you give people an entry point, you can give them a lot more of an experience. And this setup to this piece has worked very well. Today, it definitely woke some people up. I played this, a much more truncated version of this program involving a lot of other people on Skid Row recently at the Midnight Mission, which is a homeless shelter. And a lot of the people were at the program. That's the thing that I do on the artistic board of an organization called Street Symphony, and they serve incarcerated and homeless people in the LA area. And we went in, and it's one of those programs where a lot of the people are there because they want to be there, but some people are there because they have to be there for whatever program they're in. So you've got a difficult task to get everyone engaged, and it is really about engagement. There's a lot of asking of questions. You're not just performing. And it was tough with about half the crowd for the first 20, 25 minutes. Yeah. And then I played the Penderecki, this piece that's like,
it's so out there.
It's so out there, and it's so like, it's also so in, like, it's really I think it's fantastic, but you could also, if you wanted to criticize it, you would say that it's avant-garde and just written for people who are in the know, and like, but no, I play it, and man, the hands fly up at the end of that piece. Cool. Everyone's sitting up, eyes are bright. It's unbelievable. And I got that same reaction playing it at fundraisers of symphonies. Yeah. I mean, this piece is incredible, and I love giving people an entry point so they have a chance to really be engaged and experience something out there.
Absolutely. And that's exactly how we felt. I had been in the class and ran and grabbed a bunch more students and dragged everybody up to hear from backstage. And it's a piece where maybe if you heard it on the radio or an album, you'd be like, yuck, because it's really the context, like you said, and the physicality, and you just grabbed them and sucked them in, and everybody was still and really paying attention. And it just shows you that presentation and the experience of art live is a totally different world and really grabs people. And you don't need a PhD or a black turtleneck. You can enjoy modern music.
You don't need to understand. I mean, because it was a class, I talked about the tone row afterwards. Right. But you don't need to know the tone row and that the A flat that's missing the whole time. You don't have to know that. It's, you have a way to get in and an amazing experience.
Yeah, it was fantastic. You also told a story, which I would love for you to tell the listeners about the Bach Cello Suites.
Oh, right. Yes.
And I would just love to hear it again and just really bring so much context to that whole work and how much we love it today.
Right. So the Cello Suites by Johann Sebastian Bach, there are 6 of them, and each one of them has 6 movements, and they're recorded by every major cellist. I mean, I was trying to remember in the class, Yo-Yo Ma has done 3 or 4. Yeah, he just finished what I think he said was his final version, and I think it was his 4th version. And he's not alone. People do them several times, and that's the thing. If you want to like compare cellists, you can choose Dvorak Concerto or Saint-Saëns Concerto or Elgar, but the main one is the 6 Bach suites. Right. And they're so... This is something I find with a lot of music, but Bach this is one of my favorite examples. We get so like precious about them. Mm-hmm. These are these great works. These are these things that you can't touch them, and they must have just always been great. And I think that the legend sort of, in some ways, detracts from the experience of being able to feel like they're alive. Mm-hmm. And so I love to find any way that I can to flip it on its head. And you can do that with pretty much any music by thinking about the context in which it was written, etc. But in this case, there's this fantastic element, which is that this set of pieces by one of the greatest composers to ever live didn't get performed until Pablo Casals discovered them and performed them. I think I'm going to get the date wrong by 1 or 2 years, but I think it was 1901. And this is just insane to me. Bach wrote this amazing music, which every cellist is judged by now, and you just sort of assume that it was always that way. But no, they were kind of lost. No one paid any attention to them. The few people who did actually buy copies of it over the years just used them as like little studies. I don't think they were ever performed. Pablo Casals found them when he was walking down the street with his dad in Barcelona and saw them in a shop window, ran in and practiced them every day for 12 years before essentially giving the world premiere of the best solo cello music.
Right.
And
it's incredible.
After that, there was an explosion of solo cello music. 20th century is where we really started to figure out all the stuff that cello can do. But that is largely in part because of this discovery of Bach, which is just so funny and ironic.
Lyrical and technical. And
yeah.
and it's another check in Bach's box about how crazy he was that he could write something like that for an instrument where that wasn't their job.
Right.
And so he wrote this incredible masterpiece that has so many things in it, so many technical things in it, lyrical, uses the whole instrument. And here we are, 150 years later plus, and then people are like, oh, great.
Right.
This is awesome.
Yeah. It's the other point we were talking about. He was actually out of favor towards the end of his life. He was more famous as an organist than as a composer. And he was old Father Bach. His sons had more fame as composers than he did. And it took Felix Mendelssohn in the early 19th century to do a big Bach revival. I mean, so Bach himself sort of languished for a while,
and
then was rediscovered, minus the cello suites.
It's
just so funny to me. Just all of this notion that music is just great and it's just big, and like, sure, there's this tradition of believing that, but I love to look back and say, how did it become this way? And what does that mean for us, both in terms of truly appreciating it, not just as something that we're supposed to accept without question, but the story behind it and the inspiration to keep creating.
Exactly.
Because nothing just fell out of the skies as great.
Right.
It's a process, and that's really the tradition to me, is the process, not the canon. So I want to get away. I love the canon, but I want to look at why it's the canon and build on that.
Absolutely. And also the opportunity that if a piece comes your way and you think there's something there, then seize it and help it grow, because these different great players took these things and
you have to have a champion
and brought them forward, and otherwise they might not be there.
Leonard Bernstein and Mahler, another great example.
Because we don't think that there could ever be life without Mahler.
I know, but there was before Lenny was like, hey, really, I know, like, you kind of thought it was just long and stuff, but it's pretty cool. Let me show you.
Right, and now it's every musician's favorite orchestral thing to do is play the Mahler.
I love Mahler.
I can't imagine an orchestra without Mahler.
Yeah, wouldn't be the same.
It's incredible. So I would love to take a second to go all the way back.
Yeah.
You were very young when you started playing. Yes. So what were those early years like? Did you get tied to a teacher?
Yes. I had an unusual upbringing in music. I grew up in Oklahoma, which is not the hub of classical music, but my parents are both musicians, and they're church musicians, but they had studied violin and cello. Actually, I don't know exactly when my mom started, but I know that she played in high school and probably started in middle school or something. My father played a little bit of the cello. Mom was on the violin. And they both played in their college orchestra as well. So there was a love for classical music, even though that wasn't really the career path.
Right.
And they wanted me to start something just to have self-discipline and appreciation for art and get a college scholarship to study something practical.
Right.
I loved it. By the time I was 6, I'm going to be a solo cellist. That's all I wanted to do. And some of it, I think obviously the cello is a big part of that. I love the sound of the cello, always have. Love the music that has been written for the cello. Love engaging with other musicians from behind the cello. But I also think that my first teacher was a big part of that. And it's kind of a funny story. My parents couldn't find a cello teacher that they respected as a musician that was willing to take a 3-year-old.
Right.
There were some very good cello teachers, but they weren't going to.
No one wants a 3-year-old.
No. For some reason, the concertmaster of the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, a man named Lacey McClary, was willing to take me on. He's kind of the big Suzuki teacher in the Oklahoma City area, had a lot of teachers that would sort of work with him, and he would run the group classes. And but all violin. He's a concertmaster. He's a
Right.
violinist. So from the age of 3 to 13, I studied cello with a violinist.
Awesome.
And he would sort of demonstrate on his violin, and then I would copy it on my cello. And we would look at the pictures in the Suzuki books to see how my hands were supposed to be that was different from the
Right.
violin. And he would consult with his colleagues in the orchestra about, aside from the order of the Suzuki books, once I got into other things, okay, well, which concerto should he start with?
Right. He's like, I've got this 5-year-old.
Yeah. Well, but my whole experience as a cellist was really shaped by learning from a melody instrument.
Absolutely.
And I think that really affected me because I've never been satisfied to just have the bass line.
Right.
I played in the Seattle Symphony for 2 years. It was wonderful, but I couldn't ever. The bass line is fine, but I grew up, I guess, thinking I was a violinist who
Right.
just played on a bigger violin.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, there's a lot to unpack
That's
there,
cool.
but I truly believe that experience was very formative and in some ways very exciting. Of course there were a few drawbacks, but I think overall it was good for me because I had this mindset of I'll just get out there and do the thing.
Right.
And I loved it, and I didn't see why anything was supposed to be difficult because it wasn't difficult for my teacher.
Right.
No one told me the cello was supposed to be harder than the violin.
Right.
So I didn't believe it should
And he
be.
was singing, so
Yeah.
then you sing. It's very cool, and it makes perfect sense. It makes that whole the shade that you saw everything and make perfect sense.
Yeah, it's pretty funny to me, but that's my origin story.
That's cool. So it perfectly flows into the Seattle Symphony. So I feel like your experience there is a unique experience, but it has happened tons over the years and continues to, where this 20, 21, 22-year-old wins the gig, didn't have a job before, and gets plopped in a principal role.
Right.
And people surrounding, I don't know if anyone ever asks you, but I feel like I've been privy to so many conversations where people are like, how are they ready? How can they do it? How do they know what to do? How has, the life experience part, which it hasn't happened yet. So what was your perspective of that now that you're older, looking back at yourself?
Well, that's a very good question. I think, first of all, the Seattle Symphony was so supportive. I was the youngest person in the orchestra by, I forget, it was 5 or 7 years. So Sayaka, my friend Sayaka, was the next youngest person, and I forget if she's 5 or 7 years older than me. And so it was a big deal.
Yeah.
And to be a principal, no less, principal cellist. And the guy before me, Ray Davis, had that job for twice as long as I had been alive. So,
Awesome.
So it was a very intense shift for everyone,
Right.
and they really embraced it. So just all of that to say, it would not have worked at all if they had not been welcoming and excited, not just accepting, but embracing of the notion that someone this young could do it. And really, I think for me, it was all about doing my best to be present and play the best that I could. And I think that the things that experience teaches you are not, some of them are inherently experiential, experience based. Some of them are learning how to prepare for things. If I've never played a Mahler symphony before, someone who has played a Mahler symphony has a leg up. However, if I get the score ahead of time and I study several different recordings and I play along with them, there are going to be a couple of things that I still don't know, but I can show up super prepared with a strong concept of what I'm doing, and in the end be open enough to not be dogmatic about my approach, but trust that the sort of cumulative knowledge of this section and of the orchestra is something that I can rely on as well. So for me, there were things that didn't work, but I saw it as an opportunity to learn a new way of leadership and to challenge myself to be a great player in a new way, and to really learn from everyone around me, not only in the orchestra, but the guest conductors, the conductors, and the soloists that would sit or stand 4 feet away from me, which is where I really wanted to be.
Right. And just what that that whole life is and what it means, and
Yeah.
that experience. It's awesome. And I feel like sometimes people feel they almost inhibit themselves because they're like, well, it's amazing that he can do that, but I would feel that like I needed to practice, or I'd be scared I would make a mistake, or things like that. But it sounds like you just took the approach of, I'm going to be super prepared and I'm going to go play.
Yeah, and I think I was helped a little bit. I mean, I'm not going to claim that I was always perfectly prepared, and I think I was helped a little bit in my ease of it by the fact that it wasn't my dream.
Mm-hmm.
So while I wanted to do, I always want to do my best, and I wanted to I can't walk into a situation and not want to leave the best impression possible and do my best job. But it also, like, I knew that I would leave.
Right.
So I didn't feel like in some ways my career, yes, hinged on it, but it wasn't, I wasn't concerned about things like tenure.
Right.
That wasn't a concern for me. I don't know if I didn't stay long enough to find out if I would have gotten it. I think I would have.
Right, exactly.
I was liked, I know that, but it wasn't, I didn't have that extra bit of nerves. I wasn't buying a house.
Right.
I wasn't like staying in Seattle, sort of things that all of a sudden you have a lot riding on
Right.
your everyday experience there. I had a different set of things riding on my experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it actually helped me not be nervous about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was different than some people in that regard, but I do think overall, yeah, just being prepared and being open.
Fascinating. So now that you have basically created an incredible career of what you were hoping for, of soloing and composing and curating and all of these other things, one thing that I'm always just mesmerized by when I watch people do this is the energy that is required for that lifestyle.
Yes.
This being a case in point. Yesterday you were on a plane, 2 days ago you were in Malaysia, then you do a concert, then you wake up in the morning, you do a class, you do a podcast, you do a master class, then we ship you off to the next place, and it just keeps spinning. So how do you manage the output of energy that happens when you play and when you pour yourself into something, and that whole thing? Do you purposely pad weeks of quiet? Do you crash? Do you never crash? Do you thrive on energy? How does it all work for you?
I definitely crash. I think a lot of people sort of crash quietly. I do that. I think that it's important to have people around you who understand the distribution of energy
Mm-hmm.
that you're talking about, like on a concert day, especially. No, there's no especially. That's the thing, actually. I treat every concert like it matters more than anything else. And on a concert day, I'll be low energy for most of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a dress rehearsal, I kind of like, I really go for it in some ways, but I don't want to be as loud. I want to save my arm a little bit. I want to save my energy. And it's weird because the peak energy is from 8 to 10 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And so then after that, of course, you're awake until 2 or 3 a.m. regardless, because you're just wired even after the dinners and the receptions, and you've got a 4 a.m. wake-up call to go to the airport to get on a flight to go to the next city. And it is very tough. I will say personally, again, I have a somewhat different situation than a lot of people in that I do a lot of things that you mentioned, the curating, the composing. I do a lot of special projects. I do a lot of I love doing master classes. Mm-hmm. Things that other people, a lot of my friends will do one of, I do a lot of them.
Right.
And that has been so sort of demanding of my time that I've started to build an office. There's just no other way around it.
Yeah.
None of the systems that exist in large infrastructures in classical music can actually facilitate all of the different kinds of engagements that I do in a given month. Mm-hmm. And so I have ended up in the many years doing it all myself and just getting totally burnt out.
Yeah.
And there's no time to stop.
Right.
And I don't want to have the feeling of it ever turning into a job.
Right.
I want it to be a beautiful experience. And I love the way that I feel about music. And so to protect that, I've hired somebody to help take care of a lot of the things. And this is a fairly new thing for me, but you have to have a manager as a soloist. And so I have my manager and I have that whole office, Opus 3 artists, and they do their thing. whatever they don't do falls to me and Dorothy, and we're, figuring out how to build that team, that part of it that takes on a lot of the, not just logistics, but the communication between various kinds of organizations that aren't in classical music, or people that are actors that I work with, and just my network in general of people that I like show up in a city and I want to just be able to be here, not to be constantly on the phone dealing with next week.
Right.
And so it's a transitional point right now. You're asking a question about something that I've asked myself out of necessity, and my answer in my case is to do more, because it's what I believe I'm here to do with music, and it requires more. So that's what I'm doing. I think for a lot of people, and I'm trying to learn this simultaneously, it's about learning what to say no to.
Right.
I'm certainly learning that. I made it sound like I just say yes to everything. I'm learning to say no as well. But I think I know several friends who are just super focused, and they'll just play like 5 pieces a year.
Right, which was going to be my next question, is really the preparation side of it. Yeah. I feel like some people start drowning when they say yes to things and they back up right on top of each other, and they're really varied, and maybe there was not time before for the preparation. So do you kind of forecast out your year? Okay, these are the concerti, this is the recitals, I can share this here and here, I'll change this for this thing, and kind of map it out ahead of time, or stuff just rolls in and you work with it?
I've tried to do the mapping out thing. I end up always having a pretty crazy repertoire set. That being said, the core cello repertoire is not as large as like for the piano or something. If you're talking concertos, especially, so I learned all of the sort of core classic cello concertos. I had them all learned by the time I got to college, I think, or like through the first year of college. And so by the time I was 17, I had everything memorized already. And I long ago, like my first teacher, that Lacey, the violinist, he never let me use music in lessons ever. So I am super lucky that it's all there pretty much. Like I check the music because I want to be OCD about markings, but I could play any number of pieces right now, even if I haven't played it in 2 years.
Right. It's ready.
That's just super lucky. And that helps me be able to do all of these things, and I can prepare very quickly. My preference is to do something in between, like 5 months out, I'll run through something and just see how it is. And if I need some extra time, or if it's a new piece in particular, I'll spend more time at that initial thing. And then the 2 months out, I'll check in again. This is approximate. But, and then
just keep
couple weeks
it.
out, a couple weeks out, it depends on the piece and what else is going on, but it'll start making its way actually into the regular rotation closer to the concert time. Yeah. And of course, hopefully by the time the week of whatever that particular rep rolls around, it feels simultaneously fresh, but also comfortable.
Right.
So that's the goal, and that I've mostly managed to have happen.
And that's pretty incredible when you add travel in, and then you add all the logistics of the time zones and the running around and the packing and unpacking. And I think that's really what gets you in the end, is the travel.
Carving time for practice is really hard with the travel and like emails.
Yeah.
Frankly.
So one question I love to ask everybody, which you can answer it any number of ways, is about, I'm really interested in how the magic of performance affects different people, and those performances that you leave being like, got him, that was a good one. Like that touched you, the performer. Yeah. So what I love to know about are maybe a performance you attended. A lot of times for people, it's when they're younger, and it just blew you away. Any instrument, anything, and you left with that, and you carry it with you. And then if there was a performance that just for whatever reason was particularly meaningful to you, that you carry with you as you go on your different journeys.
Yeah, I think there are many when I was younger. I remember there's a snippet in my memory of seeing a cellist perform with the Oklahoma City Philharmonic. I don't actually know who it was. I know I was very young. I was probably 6 or 7. My parents would sneak us in under the allowed age and give us They would buy candy that didn't have wrappers and sort of pass it down the row
Awesome.
to keep us quiet. And so we saw, we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't see them that often, but we got to see the Oklahoma City Philharmonic at a very young age. And I remember this cellist, and I've turned it in my head, I've turned it into Rostropovich. I could actually look back and see if it was, I don't know if it was Rostropovich, but it was some famous male, very old, a lot older cellist. And he was playing so high on the fingerboard. It was his fingers he was playing up so high, and I was at the age where I had not yet really seen that. I'd played in first position, I think maybe second position.
Yeah.
And to see that, I don't even know what he was playing. I was so young, but it's so clear in my mind, this image of this person leaning forward to reach these notes, and the feeling that I had of, wow, you can do more? Wow, I was just excited that I didn't know everything, that there was more to learn. That made a huge impression on me. I also, there have been so many, the first time I heard an opera live, I was actually embarrassingly late. I've played in operas before that and loved it, but the first time I sat in the audience was Der Rosenkavalier with the Seattle Opera after I got the job, and I was sitting next to Spate Jenkins, and I got a little embarrassed because I'd never sat in an opera hall and watched an opera before, and this beautiful sound of this singer singing an aria that I don't think was supposed to be that beautiful, like the words, but I wasn't looking at the words, and I just had tears coming down my face because of the sound.
Right.
And, many moments like that, I really love music, and I love it when I'm able to not think critically.
Right.
And I don't mean hey, that was good, but just to turn off the voice of how can I do this, or can I do this, and to just be there is an amazing experience.
Yeah, and I think especially when you're concertizing so much, the ones that just pop out of the fabric of it all stay with you even that much more. Sometimes it's first performances or new cities or new colleagues or things like that, because you've done a lot of premieres.
I've done a lot of premieres. There, as far as things that I carry with me from my own experience, sometimes it really is a moment where you sort of pass a point that you hadn't been before. And there was one, Carnegie Hall. I was playing a movement from a Bach suite, and it was totally packed. It was for YouTube Symphony. Michael Tilson Thomas had asked me to play this thing, and I was backstage, and I was trying to decide whether or not I was supposed to be nervous.
Right. Am I terrified right now, or am I happy?
And I knew I was excited, and I couldn't tell if it was afraid excited or happy excited. And I looked in the mirror, and it's some version of something someone had said to me once, that people are there to be moved.
Yeah.
And I was chosen to be here because people believe in me.
Right.
And so I looked in the mirror, and regardless of there's technical stuff with the performance, because there was a video I had to sync up with and everything. So the performance itself was not actually, the sound was amazing in Carnegie Hall,
right.
But it was backstage at Carnegie Hall where I had this change in how I felt about whether or not the imposter syndrome thing, which I think a lot of people feel. I still feel, but this was one of those moments where I was in this place that could have just crippled me. And I realized that I loved what I did, and that's what I wanted to share, and that I was going to go out there and I was going to share that, and the people who were there for that would get that, and the people that weren't there to be moved, who cares?
Exactly.
Why are you here? So that for
That's
me
awesome.
is something that I carry with me and try to remind myself of.
Yes, and I think that keeps coming back as being really the key ingredient is you just have to share. You have to be willing to share, and then it will be received any way that it should be received. It doesn't have to be the thing that you're sharing, but you have to keep it open so that you say something and then people will feel the emotions they're going to feel.
Yeah, it's ultimately it's something we can all do, which is it's being present. It's being present and being open and not worrying about what might happen.
Right.
Do what you're here to do.
Right.
That's it.
And
we can all do that.
That's the end of it. Yeah. And magic happens from that.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I guess so for my last question before we have to go, I've loved kind of looking through your website and seeing all of your social media and how you're kind of helping from your angle, just keep getting our community glued together. And so the Popper Challenge is so
Challenge.
cool.
Oh, good. Sweet.
It's so cool.
That's one of those things that Dorothy, my producer, is a big part of.
I love it. I love it. It's such a fun idea. We have our version of the Popper and clarinet, and every instrument does.
Yes.
And we've played them to death, and I think it breathes new life into it. And similar to the 100 days of practice that kind of has been going around, I feel like it's making everyone realize that everyone is practicing and you're not alone.
Right.
And get out there and practice it. It doesn't need to be perfect. And keep going. Take a video, like see what happens. And it's sticking. So in the end, are you listening through everything and then you're picking people for a master class? Is that the big final?
Right. So, well, there's a lot that's happening over the course of the year. And to give some context for people who don't know what it is, 10 years ago, I started something I called the Popper Project. I decided to record videos of the 40 etudes called the High School of Cello Playing, Hochschule, not like our high school, but like the highest school of cello playing by David Popper. These are the standard 8. Every cellist comes across. This is like the bread and butter of learning the cello is Popper etudes. You do your scales, you do your Popper, and then you practice.
Right.
So that's so I wanted a challenge for myself, and so I recorded and uploaded all 40 just as a way to like develop regular practice skills, and they got so popular.
Yeah.
I was blown away. I thought 25 people would watch. It ended up that right now the channel that my etudes are on has, I think it's 1.2 million views.
Incredible.
And some of the etudes have been viewed over 100,000 times. And I get letters and notes from people all the time, and it was really just something that I did for me.
Right.
And so 10 years later, I was trying to think, okay, I never really followed up on this. And how would I follow up? I kind of tried with some Bach. I thought about recording the Piatti Caprices. And then I was like, wait a second. Everyone does this. They had a great response. I should just challenge people to do their version of this. Not to necessarily take on all 40. But the reason it's so popular is because so many people do this and they feel alone.
Yeah.
It's not like Bach. It's not like Dvorak, something where you perform it for people.
It's a little bit thankless.
You do it. You do etudes and you never play them on stage.
Yep.
It's done. It's so you're totally alone. So this Popper Challenge is really building a community of people who are putting their practicing out there, and it's opening up all these questions of like, what is an etude for?
Right.
So throughout the year, yes, people are posting. I'm listening. I've got other people who are helping me choose. I hate choosing. So, so I'm trying as much as possible to get other people to choose cellists for master classes that I do every month online. And the second one's about to happen. We haven't scheduled it yet, but in the next couple of weeks. And those are, yes, that is one of the rewards. It's really not, the incentive is not supposed to be to get things. It's to participate.
Do it,
Right. So first of all, in the master classes, we don't choose based on the best.
Right.
We choose based on the best master class.
Right.
So that's going to be people with different issues. And yes, we want to recognize those who take on more or who have a lot of progress. And we're figuring out ways to do that. At the end of the year, what we're hoping to do, actually what we're going to do, is release an album online of all 40 Popper etudes. Cool. And what the hope is that all 40 of them will be done by different cellists.
Cool.
And we'll just sort of see over the course of the year. Not exactly sure yet. There's some time to figure all of this out, and some of it depends on whether we get a budget that can handle these sorts of things or not. But it would be great to have good recording quality. But at the very least, we'll have a collection of great examples of these etudes by cellists from all around the world. So that's like one of the big things that we're doing. There are other things that I can't really talk about right now that we're going to release soon. Again, incentives for participation. Mm-hmm. There isn't a whole lot of incentive to just be great or to do them all. Mm-hmm. We'll come up with more ways to honor that, but it's all about participation and about self-growth. And I really want to make sure that if someone just plays one etude and they record the same etude every month, but they get better at it, that's super important.
Yeah,
that's what
it's so
this
valuable.
is about. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it just continues to unify the world now, because classical music is, you can go anywhere and meet and see your friends and meet people, and we're so small but so big. And so just finding a way to unify everybody and get them participating with each other, it's going to make the whole culture and the business stronger. And there's so many incredible players out there. And if you grew up in whatever small town, you only know your people, and then you go to college and you meet those people, and your own world sometimes isn't that big. But now all these high school kids are uploading their all-state everything, and it's incredible. I feel so happy for them, and I wish we had it when I was young.
It's a beautiful thing to be able to share, and I also think that it's so great that someone like myself, who's in a very privileged position, playing with great orchestras and seeing great stages and getting audiences, that I'm not bound to only challenge myself with people who do the thing that I do.
Right.
That somebody who just loves the cello, maybe took it up later in life, but has something to say that they can also share. Mm-hmm. We share for different reasons, perhaps, but ultimately it's all the same reason. We share because we have something that we want other people to experience. We want them to be moved. Even etudes can do that. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a way of reconnecting not only with other people, but with what is so great about music in the first place. It's not the excellence of perfection. Mm-hmm. And that only serves to cut away the distractions for what's really at the core, which is things that connect us through our humanity. So for me, that's what it's all about.
It's beautiful. Thank you so much for today. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thanks for listening to Inside the Notes. I'm your host, Erica Block. Be sure to check the Inside the Notes Facebook page for details on our next guest.